Okay, so welcome to everyone who has just joined us for this second part of this event that's been organized today by collaboration between three different groups. First and foremost, the Guarini Center for Global Law and Tech, also the European Law Society, the Student Law Society for European Union Affairs, and thirdly, the Jean Monnet Center for Regional and Economic European and Global Law and Justice. So it's very nice to see the room full and to welcome you here. I know many of you have participated already in the earlier part of the day, focused mainly on generative AI. And I think what's really wonderful about this event is it brings together so many of NYU's different interests. It's different, the themes and the projects people are working on in different centers coming together really productively and fruitfully. You know, the Guarini Center has been a terrific initiative of our colleague Benedict Kingsbury, and really fantastically well run also by Thomas Streintz and Angela Fisher, and with help from Yurong Sung and others each year. And they, as all of you know, many of you take the classes that they run, the colloquia, conferences like today, and many other research projects going on. So they're really at the cutting edge, I think, of much of what's important and happening today. I'll say something in a few minutes about the Student Law Society, and particularly the two students whose initiative was to bring the ambassador here today. I won't actually introduce the ambassador. I'll leave that to the students, but just to say that that we're grateful to them for taking this initiative. And the third organ or center I mentioned is the Jean Monnet Center, which was established and set up by Joseph Weiler, and which I have co-directed with him for a few years now. And the Jean Monnet Center focuses mainly, but not only, on issues of European Union law and politics, but also the transatlantic relationship and European and international economic law and regional integration more generally. And we have a lot of, I say a lot of the postdoctoral and research fellows here. It's great to see you. We also, like Guarini, organize many events and host a research program at the Jean Monnet Center. But we've also periodically had these transatlantic conversations. So we're delighted to have Ambassador Lambrinidis here today. As you know, he's the EU ambassador to the United States. And we have had some of his distinguished predecessors before. We've had John Bruton twice when he was EU ambassador to the US, and also David O'Sullivan. And we've also had transatlantic dialogues of this kind, interviews, fireside chats. I mean, there is a fireside somewhere there, it's hard to see. But we've had them also with the President of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, and also with President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing when he was president of the convention that drafted, and ultimately not successful, but maybe had an afterlife in other ways, a constitution for the European Union. So it's wonderful to have Ambassador Lambrinidis here. We did have you once before in your capacity as Special Representative for Human Rights. Some years ago, he's had, I'll let the students talk more about that, a very distinguished career both in Greece and in the European Union. But I lastly want to introduce our two students who will take things on from this and introduce both Professor Weiler and Ambassador Lambrinidis. So we have Federico Giordano and we have Nicholas Vadiboulis, and both of them are LLM students here at NYU, and both come summa cum laude from their respective universities, the University of Athens and Luis in Rome, and came with Dean's Awards and all kinds of other distinctions here, and have done terrifically well and immersed themselves not only in digital law and data law and so on, but also in all the different aspects of NYU student life, including reviving the European Law Society and bringing Ambassador Lambrinidis here. So we're really grateful to them too, and I'd like to invite them to come up and to introduce our fireside chat. Thank you, Nicholas.
So, Your Excellencies, esteemed professors, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the European Legal Society at NYU School of Law to the keynote speech of the Ambassador of the European Union to the USA, Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis. The ambassador was born in Athens in 1962. He studied economics and political science at Amherst College and law at Yale Law School. Between 2004 and 2011, he was twice elected as a member of the European Parliament, where he has also served as Vice President of the European Parliament, Vice President of the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, and head of the Greek Social Democratic Party delegation. For me personally, as a Greek, it is a special pleasure and honor, Mr. Ambassador, to host you. And as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece, Mr. Lambrinidis is, I have to admit, a source of great pride to us all, for he's an exceptional figure who has earned widespread acclaim beyond our borders, the Greek borders. The topic of his speech today will be on the European Union's digital decade, which is perhaps the most crucial to its ambition to emerge as a leader in the fourth industrial revolution. It remains to be discovered. Before we move on to the speech, I would like to wholeheartedly thank, in particular, my professors, Joseph Weiler, Grange de Burka, and Thomas Strange, the Jan Monnet Center, and all my great colleagues and friends being here today. Without you, nothing would be possible. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all here. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for making this event possible. As Nicolas said, we will first hear from the ambassador in his keynote speech, and then in the second part of the panel, we will have a fireside chat with Professor Weiler and the ambassador. As many of you here will know, Professor Weiler is an esteemed professor here at university, is the Joseph Strauss Professor of Law, the European Union Jan Monnet Professor, and co-director of the Jan Monnet Center, together with Professors de Burka, as we've heard. And not only that, among many of the activities that he does is also a co-teacher for the Guerini Colloquium, together with Professor Schreins, that I've had the pleasure to attend personally over the last semester. And the Guerini Colloquium is really an excellent example of how we can create in an academic setting the kind of transatlantic, multidisciplinary dialogue that we need whenever we're talking about regulating digital corporations and the new technology that they embrace. Over the last months, together with the professors and many guest speakers that we've had the chance to learn about new policy proposals all around the world and think critically through them, problematize them. We know there are many initiatives that are happening to regulate the digital space, and particularly global digital corporation, but we also know that the European Union is at the forefront of them and is taking central stage. And this is why we're particularly honored to have the ambassador with us today to talk us a little bit more about the digital initiatives that the EU has taken in this regard and the current state of affairs of the transatlantic relationship between the European Union and the United States. So thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming the ambassador on stage, and thank you for being here.
This is going up and down a lot. Dear friends, distinguished professors, my dear colleague, the EU ambassador of the United Nations, Olof Skog, what a pleasure to be here with you. You heard about my American education. You can probably hear a little bit a tinge of an American accent in me. Europeans back in Europe were always, especially the European Parliament, quite amused and surprised that a Greek social democrat would be speaking in this way. But you know, but there you have it. There you have it. And I have to say that boy, you know, ambassadors are often expected to talk about virtually everything that they don't have particular expertise in. It's part of our job. And it's no different from me now here, although I have spent quite a number of years in my life dealing with issues of the new digital age, how it affects human rights, including when I was at the European Parliament, being educated about those matters and writing the first at the time report of the European Parliament on security and privacy in the digital age. And I'm so glad to see here Mark Rottenberg as well, whom you may have heard from today. Did you speak here, Mark? Okay. Endlessly. Who was one of the people who really inspired me in the way that I looked and understood those issues. And we were talking about many of those issues then, back in 2004, 2007, 2008, and boy, how technology has ran fast and changed things since. Now, perhaps my personal, I suppose, engagement in this topic can be explained by the fact that as a young kid, I was raised in a dictatorship back in Greece. When I was 5 years old, it came in. And I do remember the government, the dictatorship at the time, having files on people, mostly to be able to have information about them, arrest them on it, perhaps, intimidate them about them, including my parents. And I understood then, it just dawned on me, especially as I was thinking about them growing up, how fragile democracies are. I got engaged in human rights and democracy clearly because of that. And I think that because of that experience as well, as I approached later on the great promise and also the potential risks of a digital age and the internet and now AI, I developed eventually 4 principles through which I try to understand them. And I will share those principles with you, and I'll try to be relatively short because I also want to engage with you in conversation also with Professor Weiler. The first principle is that in a real democracy, it is the citizens who are supposed to have the power and the means to know about and to judge the thoughts and the actions of their governments. Not their governments or companies for that matter, who are the ones who are supposed to have the means and the information to judge the thoughts or the actions of their citizens. If you go from A to B, you have flipped democracy on its head. And we have been going from A to B, even in our own societies. Non-democracies have been doing it for quite a long time. If you look at the way that China in Xinjiang is using face recognition and voice recognition and movement recognition, all that stuff to be able to control a whole people because of their religion or because of their political beliefs, you kind of understand that. But democracies, and our calling card in a democracy is to be able to apply our own principles and rules forcefully in our societies, also have gone through a transformation when it comes to that. I remember especially after the shock of 9/11, the realization that terrorism was at our door, the biggest danger that democracies really had to face, how we very often used the technologies of the time in a way that, in my view at least, tended to prioritize security over fundamental rights in a way that there was really no real discussion about it. But how about companies? The information that companies have today about anything about our private lives, from our health to our political beliefs, to our relationships, it's quite remarkable. We don't know much about those companies. They know a lot about us. In a democracy, it is citizens who are supposed to be able to observe and judge the thoughts and actions of their governments and big companies. Not the governments and companies who are supposed to judge the thoughts and actions of their citizens. Second principle. Technology does not automatically embody values, and certainly not democratic values. And that means that it should not be the mere creation of technology or a technological breakthrough that should determine that technology's use. It should be citizens, governments, civil society, the private sector making that determination after a serious discussion. You will not allow a medication to come in the market if it's not checked to see if it's safe. You will not allow a car to come on your streets if you haven't made sure that it is safe. You should not be assuming that it's obvious that because some technologists in Beijing or in Silicon Valley came up with a particular technological breakthrough, that technological breakthrough should automatically be adopted and sold and used in a society without taking care of understanding the risks. And yet we do this almost all the time. So it's very, very important to be able to set guardrails as Europeans, as Americans, bringing together others on what the fundamental principles, what those fundamental values that have to be baked in technology should be, and then to be able to examine whether or not they are, in fact, reflected in the technologies that come out. When it comes to the first risk I mentioned to you, the European Union, the risk of who holds and uses private data, who judges whom, the European Union came out several years back with a General Data Protection Regulation, which of course we call GDPR, so no one understands what it is. And it was an effort on our side to be able to say, these are the guardrails, this is what companies have to put in place to ensure that our data is fundamentally and strongly protected. This is how consent works. You cannot just simply use my data, you have to seek my consent, but it's not any type of consent, you have to do it in the right way, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to the second, let me just tell you without getting into details that Americans and Europeans have been talking and agreed to what we call an artificial intelligence roadmap in our Trade and Technology Council. Trade and Technology Council is where we have the highest levels of our political systems. Americans here, Europeans on the European side, talk about the intersection of trade, technology, and security. And back in December, that roadmap focusing primarily on how we together, Americans and Europeans, work on standards for AI and how we work together to determine risks for AI. That is what we did. So if you're really interested in getting the weeds, I advise you to go and try and do that. Now, third principle. In today's world, Big Brother will not come in one fell swoop because some authoritarian comes and imposes it on us. It will come through salami slicing of our rights, little by little, and with our own consent, if it does. And it is absolutely imperative that we make sure this doesn't happen. When Mark and I were working on these issues back in the 2000s, a big topic of discussion was cameras in the streets. How many do you have? And for what purposes? To catch a terrorist? Makes sense. To regulate traffic? Makes sense. But then wait a second. Those cameras have the capacity to work 24 hours a day, nonstop, 7 days a week. What about if a camera in a protest outside here at Washington Square identifies every single person who is in that protest so that it can also eventually, the police, deal with a few of those people who maybe were violent? But we have identified everyone. Is that okay? What about if you use 24-hour surveillance on everybody, so we know exactly where you are at any particular moment, and you and me and you, to catch a pickpocket, not a terrorist, a pickpocket. We don't like pickpockets, obviously. But is that okay? So real questions then arose. Well, how do we avoid that slippery slope? What do we as democracies consider to be necessary, proportionate, and appropriate use of those technologies? Who should have access to them? Everyone? Some people? Under what circumstances? Our data, how well is it protected? When should it be deleted? Never? A month after it's collected? 3 months after it's collected? All these questions, oh my goodness, how boring can they be for the average person, especially a politician? You think you can just, get a lot of votes by going back to Greece or to Italy or anywhere else and saying, I ensured that your data would be deleted after 1 month instead of 2 months. Really? It is all those questions put together that determine whether or not democracy remains a democracy or whether or not it slides down to a different direction. They are supremely important questions. And what concerned me at the time is that I had companies, in particular companies, telling me, but what's your concern, Ms. Lambrinidis? What's your concern? We're trying to catch terrorists, actually, yes. Are you a terrorist? No. Are you an organized criminal? No. Then what's the problem? Then we'll go to the next question, which I found particularly insidious and dangerous. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. I find that dangerous because it, in a sense, tells every innocent person that they should be willing voluntarily, remember the salami slicing, to allow their own 24-hour-a-day surveillance in order to be able to catch some bad people. And who likes bad people? No one. So, hey, if you want to catch terrorists, why don't you allow me to just survey you 24 hours a day? Oh, okay. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. I would answer them, if you have nothing to hide, you don't have a life. Get a life. We all have thousands of perfectly legitimate things. Our histories, our relationships, private interactions, our political beliefs that we do not want to have in public display for everyone at all times, and certainly not for any government or any company who just wishes to take them. So, third principle that we have to be very concerned and aware about is that, indeed, if you are concerned about the slide in a democracy, don't expect it to happen because some authoritarian will bring it to you. Be concerned that it may happen with your own consent, and don't allow that to happen. Final point, and I'm done. And final principle. Governments, they have to act. I mention this because there is, especially when it comes to Europe, a very easy attempt to make sure that a government does not play its public role and obligation as voted by its citizens by attacking governments for killing innovation when it comes to regulating and technology, not allowing all these brilliant minds around the world to be able to just bring out any tech they want at any particular speed they want, how terrible that is. And certainly in the case of Europe, oh my goodness, aren't we the bureaucrats back there? You know, the big regulators, that's all we dream about. We wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, and all we dream about is how to regulate things. which I find to be quite interesting. Everybody working for the US administration is what? A civil servant. Everyone working for the European Commission is what? A bureaucrat. How does that work? How does that work? Europe, by the way, and Professor Weiler, we're going to talk about this afterwards, is the biggest deregulation experiment in the world, mind you. We took the laws and regulations of 27 independent countries and we put them aside. And that's what allowed us to create the single market that brought down borders for people, for goods, for services, for capital, for 450 million people in the world. Of course, we had to replace them with one single set of regulations. That's the biggest deregulation experiment in the world that you can ever imagine. That's what Europe is. But we need to be able to address both the promises and the risks, and we need to address the risks of artificial intelligence, especially in order to make sure that the promises flourish. Because what happens does affect us all. Dear friends, I remember when the internet came out, heck, I was one of those evangelists for the internet, to be honest. I really, truly believed that democracy will break out everywhere. And instead, what I have seen with a big part of the internet, including in my own society, I'm not even mentioning the Chinas and Russias of the world, is how remarkably easy it has been for it to be used for repression. I have seen the terrible split in our societies and the hatred and the echo chambers. I have seen how the promise of allowing information to spread has turned out into amazing blurred lines between facts and fiction. And I have seen our democracies, which are the most difficult political system in the world, because they do not rely on one leader, usually a guy, making decisions for the rest of us, but relies on every one of us having enough information and understanding what's really happening to be able to make determinations. Like I've seen our democracies also be in real danger. So we have to learn from lessons of the past here. And we are learning when it comes to AI because it multiplies those risks. But this is, and I want you to keep this is how Europe is approaching this. First, we do not and will not regulate technology itself. We do and will regulate the uses of technology. That is to say that we are trying to determine, under the principles that we have set on what values AI should be able to reflect in open societies, we'll try to determine the risks that AI may pose, no matter what the technological platform from which this risks come is. So ChatGPT, regular AI that goes into robotics for surgery, doesn't matter. What does matter is, let's look at the uses, and to determine what uses are allowable and what not, let's look at the risks, risk analysis. And our AI Act, which in classic European fashion is still not voted on, although I was speaking about it about 2 years ago, was it, Mark, first came out? But it's coming when it gets over the hurdle of 3,000 amendments of the European Parliament. And if I were there, I would probably be responsible for about 2,000 of them. But the AI law does exactly that. It is a very limited, but potentially very effective attempt to say, let's look at the risks that artificial intelligence brings. Let's determine which one of these risks are negligible, which frankly is the vast majority. In those cases, there's no need for regulation. Let's determine which of these risks are limited, small, but nevertheless not negligible. In those cases, you need transparency reporting. Let's determine which applications have high risks. And we have defined those very clearly. They include things in which, for example, a lot of bias from AI can come in. They include situations in which AI is making essentially decisions for a judge in a particular case, or is running large infrastructure networks, situations where you cannot afford mistakes. There, we have even more requirements to ensure that the companies producing it, the governments or others using it, are within the limits of the law, of those values we try to apply. And then there are some very limited applications that are where the risk is so high that they are entirely prohibited. One of them is social scoring, what China does with its citizens every day, using AI to determine who is a good citizen, who is a bad citizen, and have things flow from that. Another one with very, very narrow exceptions is 24-hour surveillance of everyone. Although the technology is there, the technology could allow you to do this, we're saying no, that cannot happen. That cannot be allowed. And so this is where we stand today. There are 4 principles that animate my interest in AI, but in some ways it's a broader European interest that comes out of fundamental human rights. That is history. That is a different history perhaps than American history, but it's very much our history. We came out of the Second World War. That's when the first roots of the European Union were planted. Out of the bloodiest war in recent history, where Europeans were killing Europeans, and where Europeans committed the biggest human rights violation in history, the Holocaust. And we came out of that committing ourselves to never, ever allow ourselves either the means or the desire to perpetrate such atrocities either to each other or to the rest of the world. That is the root of the EU, human rights, true democracy, respect for human dignity, passion for innovation, but innovation that is ensured through an open discussion between citizens, civil society, governments, companies, others. Innovation that is ensured to do the best it can to protect and to promote prosperity, freedom, hope, values. And if we manage, Americans and Europeans, as we talk to each other today, to find the right standards, the right principles, the right risk analyses, and set them for the rest of the world and with the rest of the world, I will not be as perhaps slightly pessimistic as I may have sounded today. And this is what we're working on every day to achieve. Final point, guys. Your generation is going to make a huge difference, especially in the salami slicing part. You were born with a phone in your hands. You probably, because of that, went through a phase where privacy meant absolutely nothing to you. And you found old farts like myself talking about it sounding a little weird. But also because of that, also because of the fact that you have now gone through and increasingly understood the consequence of all this, you could become the biggest champions for brilliant open innovation that protects values and freedoms. And that's my hope. Do not rely on some human rights defender in China or in Paris or in New York to do this work for you. You be the human rights champion. You be the human rights champion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The one line which I will not forget is, if you've got nothing to hide, get a life. And we don't every day of the week, we only have it every other week, the ambassador of the European Union to the United States with us. So the ambassador and I decided that we will touch on the issue of technology, but I think you've had a lot of this the whole day, and we will also broaden the discussion to some other issues. But I will start with technology, and I'm going to risk gross oversimplification. And it is that the Americans do the technology and the Europeans do the regulation of technology. Now, I am not averse to that, because if you didn't do the regulation, I don't think anybody would do it. And mostly the American regulation, if we think about it, was to protect the platforms against liability, etc. So thank you. But the other side of the equation is more problematic. If I go back to when Manuel Barroso took over the Commission and the famous Lisbon plan, there was an idea that Europe will emerge as a technological giant. And I remind you, I'm oversimplifying. That did not happen. How do you explain that?
So it's a good question, but I mean, I actually do challenge your premise. And I will tell you that innovation in Europe has never been a problem. Innovation in Europe has stepped back. COVID hits. Everyone thinks this is just the worst thing possible. Our economies collapse. And there's a discussion about bringing out a vaccine at record time that had never happened in the past, and people just doubted could ever possibly happen. And the first vaccine that comes out is the Pfizer, oh, wait a second, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. It is an American company run by a Greek guy, by the way, and a German company run by a Turkish couple, by the way, who collaborated to bring to the world market faster than anyone else the vaccine that changed our lives and gave us hope. And BioNTech was the company that was at the forefront of the mRNA technological advantages. Now, there are thousands of examples like this. Where's Europe's problem? In the financing. Europeans do not have the American entrepreneurial spirit of risk-taking. So I'm a venture capitalist. I will fund 20 companies. If one of them gives me a 1 trillion% return, I don't care if the other 19 ones die. The European financial system doesn't work this way for a number of reasons. And so we also in Europe now are looking at a financial union, a banking union. We did all those things to strengthen, to bring together the capacities and the firepower of our banks in 27 major European countries and economies in a way that will incentivize this. But it's there. However, yes, in regulation, we are ahead. And honestly, I'm proud of that. I'll tell you this, GDPR, privacy. When it first came out, oh my goodness, what I heard from American companies, from the US administration. The Europeans were jealous of Americans. We were trying to kill American innovation. We were attacking American companies so that we could finally manage with our meager brains to maybe come close to American thinking and innovation, all those things. 2 or 3 years later, every major American company had decided that actually they're going to start competing with each other on the basis of who provides more privacy, not less privacy, because they understood themselves that in order to be able to have a consumer trust this ecosystem, you could not have a situation where the consumer or the citizen feels that the data is invaded by any particular company for any particular reason without any control. And administrators here in the United States and members of Congress even today come to us still wondering how it is they could pass a federal privacy law in the US, because they understand, like we did in Europe, that unless you do it, if you start having different states in the US passing those laws separately, you're going to kill innovation for sure, because every company will not know what laws to apply if it invests in Tennessee or in California or in wherever. Because of that potential extremely damaging fragmentation of the European Union single market, did we get involved in having that regulation. So, I do not have any concern about European innovative capacity. We are up there. I tip my hat to some of the greatest, youngest, well-financed minds in Silicon Valley and elsewhere that are able to push many limits. But I assure you, so do people in Europe today. The joint challenge is how to make sure that we set the standards for the rest of the world so these technologies, don't do the wrong thing.
Far be it for me to challenge the European innovation spirit.
But please do. But please do.
But in the technology, the information society that we were talking about today, I would be happier speaking as a European if I would see some European giants developing in that sector. But it's okay to agree to disagree, Ambassador.
Okay, that's fair enough. Wait a second now, because you're provoking me. But
That was the intention.
no, I'm not going to do this. But listen, it's interesting. You look at again at COVID. European companies, innovators. Here's an example that I have. Where Danish company Cordy uses AI and voice recognition to help doctors predict heart attacks. It's an example of many that I have in this piece of paper I'm not going to read, of innovation that European companies have done that's absolutely remarkable. I insist, and I am frustrated. The problem with Europe is that we do not fund those efforts quickly, effectively, and sufficiently. It is not a lack of innovators in Europe, but
I think that's a very good answer, explaining the disparity.
Yeah.
I want to move to some geopolitical issues. And the two flashpoints, I think, in today's world is one, Ukraine, and the other, in a different set of circumstances, China. So let's, if you don't mind, talking a little bit about the Ukraine situation. But what interests me in particular is Europe, United States, Ukraine, Russia. In other words, not simply going through the horrible things that happen in Ukraine, but how do you see the relationship between the United States and the European Union in relation to that flashpoint? A really troubling one, given the values which you absolutely correctly explained at the root of Europe.
So what motivates us is that Russia is trying to do two things. The first thing is obvious, it's trying to wipe off the map Ukraine by actually killing Ukrainians, or trying to kill their spirit, hoping that they will give up, including through displacing millions of them. About 4 million Ukrainians today are in Europe, not because of their choice. 1/5 of all Ukrainian children, 1/5 of all Ukrainian children are in Europe today. They would have never chosen to come to Poland or to Greece or to Sweden to study in a school where they don't speak the language. They would have chosen to stay in the village in their town with their teachers and their friends. This is a war crime of unimaginable gravity, what Putin is committing. The second thing he's trying to do, which is not as abhorrent in a human sense, but supremely dangerous in a geostrategic sense, is that he's trying to kill the UN Charter. He's trying to kill the international legal system that all countries in the world set up together and affirmed together decade after decade, that says that might is not right. That if you have the big guns, you cannot simply invade or kill someone else or determine how they run their lives. If he achieves A and or B, the world as we know it is over. I speak to Americans in this country sometimes, and they tell me the vast majority are absolutely committed, Republican, Democrat, anything to support Ukraine to win this war to the end. Some are telling me, and I fully get this and understand this, I'm getting tired of the Ukraine story. It's just a difficult story. It's been going on for too long. Can we find some solution? I submit to you that although this war is thousands of miles away from New York, there is no safe distance when an autocrat sitting on nuclear weapons is convinced and determined that he can bend the will of our citizens and of our leaders to his own through force. Because the moment this happens, and the moment this perception gets rooted in, this is the end of America's and Europe's capacity to project our footprint in the world for decades to come. How does this connect to China? China is looking at this very carefully. And that ties to what some other people have told me, not many, or I'm hearing increasingly some voices, in the public sphere around the country. Our national security interest is China. It's not Ukraine. That's the Europeans' headache. Who do you think is looking at this war more closely than we or our Americans are? It's the Chinese. The Chinese absolutely want to see and understand whether or not the West is actually in the decline that they believe that it is, in order to be able to change a lot of the principles that we have been discussing here. These are not separate wars or separate interests. When you take guns and you try to kill people and impose your will by force, that is not okay. Russia today is the only remaining colonialist power in the world. Now, as Europeans, we know colonialism. We did it. It was absolutely abhorrent. And we have committed not to do it again. And we were attacked by the Soviet Union at the time, which, by the way, quite colonialist, wouldn't you think? Occupying all these independent countries or doing colonialism. Well, we're not doing it anymore. Guess who's doing it? Russia. That is unacceptable.
Are you satisfied by European-American cooperation
Yes,
on these two issues?
I am.
Can you speak to that a minute?
I'll speak very, very quickly on it. We have imposed sanctions on Russia together, massive sanctions, that would have been impossible to be effective if Americans had done them alone or Europeans had done them alone. It is the fact that the two biggest open economies in the world have imposed coordinated sanctions together that is making a difference. We have supplied the Ukrainian heroes on the ground with military aid, with economic aid to make sure that the Ukrainian government continues to function, that teachers get paid, that children go to school, that pensions get paid, that salaries get paid, that first responders can be there helping people, bringing them to hospitals, that hospitals can work. We've supported them together with massive financial aid. We are supporting every day with humanitarian aid together. And of course, we in Europe in particular are doing two major things. One is the aid to refugees, an issue that isn't really an American issue, and the aid to secure food for the world, food that Ukraine was a food basket of the world, and that Russia's invasion killed its capacity both to produce and to export through the Black Sea ports. And now, with the European solidarity lanes, as we call them, we have exported tens of millions of tons of grain of Ukraine to the rest of the world. And of course, now we also have an initiative of the UN that is working in parallel to allow, with fits and spurts, the Black Sea ports to do it. Why is that possible? Why has this been possible? What does it matter? Because America and Europe are the two biggest open economies in the world, and because we are the biggest source of prosperity for each other and security for each other than anything that our governments themselves do. It would have not been possible for Europe to be so massively effective in supporting Ukraine had it been economically weak. It would have collapsed when the energy crisis hit and when we decided to transition away from Russian fossil fuels to other energy sources. We would have collapsed. It's the strength of our economy that allowed us not to. It's the strength of the American economy that's allowing the US to give what it's giving. So it's not just what we're giving together. It is that it is because we are so big and so strong as economies that we can make this difference.
Would you say on the issue of China that Europe and the United States see eye to eye on Taiwan?
Yes. Yes, I would. Although the rhetoric is always, listen, guys, this is a really complex issue and it's a very delicate issue. So I don't want to get into too much domestic politics.
We understand that you don't want to be on the front page of New York Times tomorrow. I'm just teasing.
If I had the slightest fear that any New York Times reporter would take an interest in my speech at NYU, then I wouldn't say, but I don't think, who's here from the New York Times? Oh, what a surprise. No one. All right. No, that's not it. But listen.
Somebody's already tweeting.
No. Listen. I saw after Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, and President Macron of France visited China, I saw a number of articles about statements and this, that, the other. In fact, the European Union, its 27 member states, have repeatedly stated their joint position on China, including most recently in December, have repeatedly stated their joint position on Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits. We are in favor of the one China policy, which means that we will not in any way tolerate the use of force to change the parameters of the existing status quo. And President Macron has reasserted that many, many times. The real issue raised by President Macron is, and that's a real issue for serious discussion when it comes to China, is how exactly do we deal with a huge economy that is rising for many very different reasons than the ones that have made our economies rise. Huge government footprint in the economy, huge subsidization of the economy, no protection of human rights, basic rights, labor rights, by and large. How do you deal with that when the American, the European, the Chinese economies in the past decades are so intertwined? There, the European Commission president has come out and said something very simple. We Europeans do not plan to decouple from China. But we do plan to de-risk from China, which is to say that we will ensure that the dependencies, for example, we had on energy when it came to Russia, that we saw in a crisis situation could be debilitating for the EU, unless handled, as remarkably as we managed to. We will not allow such dependencies on us in the future, including when it comes to things like critical minerals that are going to be so important also for the green technologies that we're trying to put in place. We will de-risk. We will also de-risk in the international level by discussing and building alliances with other countries around the world that are willing to discuss, not agree with us, but discuss with us the basic principles that we might collectively think should be the ones guiding the world in the 21st century. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing as Europeans, and I do not see, to be honest with you, any fundamental disagreement with the American administration or Congress when it comes to this analysis.
Thank you. We started late, and I'm under strict orders that at 7:15 the guillotine falls, so be careful with your necks. But maybe one or two questions from the audience. Any takers? Yes, ma'am. Crisp questions. We have 7 minutes.
Hi, thank you so much. I guess my question is, speaking about the digital age again, how do you balance these different approaches to tech regulation that we have here in the US and are maybe more like focused on tort and actual harm than regulation of potential risk when it comes to the European Union and American, like against China, or oversimplifying again, democratic regimes against authoritarian regimes when it comes to tech?
Yeah, I have an issue when we focus too much, and I did it myself, but mostly to express concern about our democracies, not to talk about others. I see the world as a very complex place, and I don't think that there are many countries in the world that are particularly interested in having simply an autocracy versus democracy discussion. And I say this because I think that as Europeans and as Americans, we have to start focusing on that issue. We have been very good in the past years in identifying who the real bad guys are, those who are truly committed against democracy and rights, either politically or ideologically, right? And trying to push back. We've been pretty good at identifying who the quote unquote good guys are, mostly us and a couple of others. But we've been pretty miserable, in my view, in focusing on the over 100 countries in the world that are frankly neither good guys nor bad guys. Maybe they're sitting on the fence. They're not committed against democracy or rights, but they also are not always particularly perfect at applying them to everyone all the time. Those countries are listening to the siren songs of many. And we have been absent from that, in my view, for a very long time, focusing just on that Manichaean sort of distinction. So I put a lot of thought on how to be able to approach those countries as well. And that means that when it comes to tech, just as in the case of the EU and the US, it is fundamental for me that we are able to create an alliance of countries agreeing on the basic principles. We have different legal systems and different approaches, you're right. So in the US, it's more of a tort approach. It's let's allow the risks to unfold. And when there's a catastrophe, we'll come in and then we'll try to fix it. In the EU, we focus more on let's identify those risks before there's a catastrophe. because we don't want the catastrophe. And we don't want, until you get the catastrophe, for the wrong principles to have seeped through so many parts of that system that even if you deal with the catastrophe, you don't with the other stuff. But if you look at this AI roadmap that was agreed in December between Gina Raimondo, Catherine Tai, Tony Blinken on your side, Margrethe Vestager on my side, Valdis Dombrovskis on my side, etc., you will see that they both agree on a risk, the importance of addressing the AI regulation challenge based on a risk-based analysis. So there you have the US administration approaching this from a legal perspective that is closer to the risk-based than to the tort-based. Let's see what the harm is afterwards. So it's interesting. It's an interesting switch, if you like, in my view, at least.
Ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, we're reaching the end, and we have a tradition here when we have these little fire chats to end with semi-personal questions. So,
Okay.
your favorite author, your favorite holiday place,
Okay.
your favorite music, and your favorite dish to eat. You can take your pick.
So I'll be extremely boring with the author. I have so many favorite authors, honestly, and both fiction and nonfiction, all that stuff. But
When you go to your favorite holiday place, which book would you take?
I was forced recently to reread the Odyssey. And I'll tell you why I was forced. Because the Irish ambassador in Washington who's Irish here? Raise your hands. Of Irish roots, anyone other than your professor? The Irish ambassador does something every year called Bloomsday, which is sort of a celebration of Ulysses. If you've read Ulysses, I mean, that's just so. Which is the Odyssey, right? Odysseus, and So he asked me to read in that thing, and I tried to, and he gave me a passage from Ulysses, and I swear to you, I sweated over every word. How do I say this? How would a real actor or a real reader of poetry do it? And he almost saw me at the level of collapsing. And then he said, Stavros, tell you what, why don't you just forget that? Why don't you just go to the Odyssey and find something to read from there, and then we can connect Ulysses with the Odyssey. And I said, okay, that sounds like an interesting challenge. And I started reading the Odyssey, and I went through the whole thing. I absolutely recommend you to read it if you want to understand the human condition, at least as I think it was happening. Favorite food. I've told the chef, yes, we do have chefs, ambassadors. I've told the chef at the EU embassy in Washington when I went there that I wanted him to be inspired by the food of all our 27 countries in Europe, and to go and discover either some of the most favorite dishes or some of those geographic indicator ingredients like feta cheese in Greece or chorizo in Spain or something, right? That Americans particularly don't like. Any one of you who does international trade law, boy, oh boy, they want to be able to say champagne for everything. And we say, no, you can't. It's got to be from France or something like that. And then create a different dish every time, appetizer, main course. So I'll tell you, I love Greek food, but my one instruction after having my 20th Greek salad was, I know Greek food, do not cook this for me, please, again. I don't want the moussaka. I don't want the Greek salad. Know it. I want you to experiment with everyone else. So my favorite food is, yes, I do love Greek food, but here in the States, no, not on my residence, not that much. I want to celebrate the whole of Europe. That's my job. My favorite vacation spot, oh my goodness.
The place you'll go with the Odysseys.
Listen, I mean, in some ways we all go home, don't we? I mean, I happen to come from Greece. It's kind of difficult not to have about 50 favorite vacation places in Greece, honestly. So there I would tell you, and if you really want to try the Greek food, go to Greece. But go to Sweden, especially in the summer. People don't think, don't think of it. Absolutely stunning. Go to Croatia, my goodness. You know, you'll go to Paris at some point in your life anyway. I don't have to advise you to do that. You know, but you know, have you been to Brussels? I'm the EU ambassador. I'm the EU ambassador. You got to do it. The best, listen, it's a beautiful city. It rains a lot, but who cares? Who cares? Listen, but if you want to have some, I mean, if you want to now, nothing against Paris, love the French, love France, but the food in Brussels, because it's also influenced by some of the greatest chefs, the greatest food that I've had in my life is in Brussels. So take that for all those of you who thought.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes.